Hi everyone, welcome to the series of my English classes. Today we are going to discuss the lesson The Best Christmas Present in the World. As we have already discussed the first and second part of the lesson, today we are going to discuss the third part of the lesson. Before going deep into the third part of the lesson, let us have a discussion regarding the first and the second part of the lesson. As I said earlier, the story starts with the author making a decision about buying an old roll-top desk. He spotted one in a junk shop in Bridport. It was in a bad condition but was reasonable. So he thought that he could restore it and brought it home. He started working on it on the eve of Christmas. He pulled out the drawers and found them in a damaged condition. The last drawer was stuck fast, and the author had to apply more force to open it. Finally, the drawer opened and he found a shallow space inside. Inside the drawer, there was another small drawer. On it, there was a piece of lined notepaper, and it was written Jim's last letter, received January 25th, 1950. To be buried with me when the time comes. Inside the box, he found an envelope, and the address mentioned on it was Mrs. Jim Macpherson, 12 Copper Beeches, Bridport, Dorset. He took out the letter and unfolded it. It was written in pencil with a date at the top. December 26, 1940. The letter had been written by an English captain whose name was Jim Macpherson. He had written the letter to his wife Connie. Jim Macpherson had narrated a wonderful experience in his letter that had happened on the battlefield on a Christmas morning. The British and the Germans were at war. Both the armies were standing in the trenches on Christmas morning. Someone from the German side was waving off the white flag. Then they were calling out to the British army. They were wishing Happy Christmas to the British soldiers who wished them back in return. Surprisingly, some German soldiers started moving towards the British army. The captain was alarmed as he thought that they might attack them. But it turned out that they brought German wine and canned meat along with them. They were hugging one another and celebrating Christmas Day. There were no guns between them. In the middle of the war, they were trying to make peace. A German officer moved towards Jim Macpherson. He shook hands and introduced himself as Hansulf from Dusseldorf. He said that he loved to play the cello in the orchestra and greeted Macpherson for Christmas. In return, Jim Macpherson also introduced himself as a school teacher from Dorset. Hansel smiled and said he knew about Dorset, although he had never visited Dorset or been to England either. He knew about England from school as he had read books in English. His favorite writer was Thomas Hardy, and his favorite book was Far from the Madding Crowd. Jim Macpherson and Hansulf shared a Christmas cake together. Hansulf told Jim that the marzipan was the best he had ever tasted. Jim Macpherson mentioned in his letter that was a wonderful Christmas party that they had ever seen. Suddenly, some of them brought out a football on the ground. The British and the German soldiers played a friendly match. Jim Macpherson and Hansulf clapped and cheered the soldiers. Finally, the football match came to an end. The Germans won the match. Soon after, everyone had drinks and enjoyed the food. Macpherson wished Hansulf and told him that they would meet again with their families. He left with a gentle note that when the fight ends, they could all go home and enjoy quality time with their respective families. Hansulf saluted Jim Macpherson and walked away slowly and unwillingly. That night, the German soldiers were heard singing a Christmas carol. They exchanged carol. While concluding the letter, Jim Macpherson wrote to Connie that all those moments were the happiest memories of his life. He entered the letter with the hope that war would end soon. Both the armies longed for peace and he would return to Dorset soon and they would be able to spend time together again. After reading the letter, which he knew he should not have read in the first place, he placed it back neatly in the envelope. The narrator could not sleep that night, and in the next morning, he knew exactly what he had to do. So he drove to Bridport, which was just a few miles away from his place of residence. He asked a little boy for directions to the Copper Beeches. He went there looking for the address mentioned on the letter, but house number 12 Copper Beeches turned out to be a shell. Its roof was all open and the windows were covered with boards for security. To inquire about the whereabouts of Mrs. Macpherson, he knocked at the house next door. The old man in the slippers knew the lady personally. He called her a lovely lady who stayed a bit confused most of the time, but he blamed it on her age, for she was 101 years old. Her house caught fire. The actual cause of the fire is not known, but people suspect it to be candles. The old lady used a lot of candles as she thought electricity was too expensive. The old man told the narrator that she now lived in a nursing home named Burlington House on Dorchester Road, which is on the other side of the town. The narrator went to Burlington House nursing home, which he found quite easily. There were Christmas decorations all over. The hallway was decorated with paper chains, and at the end there was a Christmas tree with a lopsided angel on the top. He introduced himself as a friend of Mrs. Jim Macpherson, who had come to give her a Christmas gift. He could see everyone at the dining hall. They were all singing and wore paper hats. The matron also wore one such hat. She was happy to see the narrator and even offered him a piece of mint pie. As she took him through the corridor, she told that Mrs. Jim Macpherson did not get visitors often as she had no family. According to her, Mrs. Macpherson would be delighted to see him. The matron mentioned that she was not celebrating today as she was a bit confused, so they thought it would be better for her to rest. She took the narrator to a conservatory which had chairs made of wigs and potted plants. Inside the conservatory sat an old lady in a wheelchair with her hands folded in her lap. Her white hair was tied in a neat bun. As she sat there, she was staring in the garden when he entered. The author went and said hello. She turned her attention towards him as he continued wishing her Happy Christmas and gave her the letter. She constantly looked at his face while he spoke. It was only when he handed her the tin box that her eyes became radiant due to immense happiness. After handing the tin box over to her, he explained the series of events that led him to the letter. But she didn't listen to a word he said, as she was filled with so much happiness. Nor did she say a word. She just sat there, holding the letter in her hands with gentleness, kindness, and affection. As he stood there silently, Connie moved and took his hand while her eyes were watery. She said that he had filled his promise of being there by Christmas. She even said that he was the best Christmas present in the world. She then asked him to come near her and sit beside her. She called the author Jim. He did as she said. He went near her and sat down while she kissed him on his cheek. She told him how she read his letter daily and it made her feel like she was with Jim. And she said whenever she used to read the letter of Jim Macpherson, it made her feel like she was with him. She longed to hear his voice, but then she mentioned now that he was here with her, he could read out the letter to her in his voice. She asked if he would do that for her. She explained that she just wanted to hear his voice badly, and if he could do that for her, she would love that. She suggested that they could even have a tea afterwards. She then told him that she even made his favorite Christmas cake, marzipan. She was well aware of how he loved marzipan. The lesson, The Best Christmas Present in the World, recites a Christmas story in the midst of a war. It reflects upon the longing of the soldiers to reunite with their families. On the other hand, it also throws light upon the longing of the families of these soldiers. One such wife, Connie, 101 years old lady, whose husband was a soldier in the British Army. She misunderstood her visitor to be her husband, Jim, and called the so-called reunion as the best Christmas present in the world. The chapter, The Best Christmas Present in the World, also conveys to students a moral lesson that war only brings sadness and pain to mankind. Soldiers who fight a war and get killed in it lose their family lives in the process. Therefore, countries should follow the path of peace to attain happiness and harmony among people in the world. I hope you understood today's lesson. Let's meet with yet another new video. Thank you. Have a nice day.